Hello and welcome to the Highways Magazine podcast with me, Dominic Browne, the editor of Highways Magazine. This podcast will be bringing you news, views, interviews and hopefully some gossip from inside the world of the UK highways industry. We're dedicated to you, and I'm truly honoured to be joined today by Rob Shearing, Chief Executive of the Road Safety Markings Association. Rob, thank you very much for joining us.
Brilliant. Thank you for having me. Thanks for inviting me. And thanks for springing this on me at the last minute.
Yeah, I should say, well, Rob knew he was coming for an interview. He didn't know that he would be filmed, recorded,
and everything else.
Yeah, placed in the very hottest of hot seats. So, Rob, the RSMA recently celebrated 50 years. So it'd be great to talk about that. But firstly, can we talk about your time at the RSMA? Because you've been there for how long now?
Been here just about approaching 3 years now. So, or just about 3 years, yeah. So fast, slowly but surely getting my feet under the table. Not quite learning the lingo yet, but can just about pass just.
It takes a while, doesn't it, to get used to the many, many acronyms.
Absolutely. And, you know, my background is not science or chemistry by any stretch of the imagination. So, you know, coming into an industry that is so much full of science, so much full of technical language and so much to get used to was, I think, probably my biggest challenge when I came through the door.
What is your background?
So my background is finance. And I remember having a conversation with Steve Scott and Paul Aldridge when I first joined the RSMA, or was first interviewed for the RSMA.
Key members of the RSMA.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
At the time, obviously Steve's now retired, and so has Paul, to be fair.
Has Paul retired?
Yeah, Paul has retired. Yeah, retired at Christmas.
Oh, I'll have to report that. I didn't know.
Yes, so Paul has retired and hung up his. I mean, you cannot understate the amount of work that he has done for sustainability and moving that whole conversation on. But I remember having a conversation with them both and saying, do you know, I know nothing about road markings. Why on earth would you want? And they kind of said, you've got a board who absolutely live and breathe this industry. We will be your technical, you know, if you don't understand to it, you come to us and you ask us and we will help you through that process. What we need is somebody to lead the organisation to, I suppose, you know, grow its awareness and raise its profile and do exactly the work that we've done really for the last 50 years. And you touched on it, that it is our 50th anniversary. I think it's all about how we represent our members and how we raise the profile. Excuse the pun slightly.
I was going to say, I got it.
Of road markings, how we raise, you know, awareness and how critical they are to road safety.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to take a step back, so you said to the RSMA, I've got no experience of this. So what attracted you to the job?
I think, do you know, first and foremost, I mean, I live in the area, and it's not very often that I get the opportunity to look at a role that was almost a chief exec role in my backyard. Yeah. I think that's, you know, all of my other roles have been further afield, to be fair. So that was first and foremost. Then I started to look at the RSMA and say, okay, what do they do? And I like a challenge, if I'm brutally honest. And it was something that really stretched me as a person. Yeah. And I thought I could go and do some good.
Do you find it more fun than finance?
At 100%.
That's what I wanted to hear.
100%.
But finance took you all over the world, did it?
Yeah, it certainly took me all over the UK and, you know, and certainly, you know, into Europe. And I think, you know, my background, I've always understood numbers. You know, I'm slightly dyslexic. I say slightly, mildly dyslexic, but I've always been more comfortable with numbers than I am with words. I think that's fair to say. You know, the digital revolution that's come over the last 20 years has certainly helped me no end, for sure. So that has always appealed to me. And I say the analogy like this is being a chief exec is one of the greatest roles you can have. But ultimately moving from one organisation to another is it's almost like driving a lorry. The furniture's changed in the background, but you're still leading and steering the organisation. You're still leading and steering that lorry, and I think that's the important thing. And a lot of it's about relationships.
Yeah. So what attracts you to that role? You said you love being a chief exec and you love a challenge. Why is that, do you think?
I guess that's a really good question. I guess there's a part of me that likes to make a real difference. I've done a number of, I've done some roles where I've worked with third sector organisations, for example, and I think that ability to make a difference and leave some form of legacy is really important. And why should that be no different with a trade association?
Yeah.
And I like building relationships. I like conversations. I like meeting people. And actually, this role is very much about being outward facing. It's about supporting the industry. It's about raising its awareness, and I think that's important. And I'm good at that, he says flippantly.
No, you are. You're really good at it. You've had some excellent conferences, which we'll come on to. But just want to touch on this idea of how you can leave a legacy. When you take on a leadership role, it's always a risk to do new things, isn't it? And how did you kind of approach it? Because to leave a legacy, you've got to do new things. But then often you come into a role, and particularly in a sector like ours, there's an element of that, we've got to be careful if we're going to try anything new. How do you take on that approach of something may be working, but you want to push it a little bit further forward?
I think first and foremost to that, I think, the most important thing for me when I arrived was to go and try and meet everybody and listen to everybody's voices. And I think one of the excellent things about the RSMA is it has a broad membership range. So we have small businesses, small SMEs, and we equally have larger SMEs at one end of the scale. And how do you ensure that all of their voice is heard? And I think, so for me, one of the first things was, let's go out, let's speak to people, let's learn about them and about their business, and then say, well, okay, how can the RSMA support them do that? And I think, there was a number of things that needed doing initially to add more resilience into the organisation, to support our training team, to support the organisation in the short to medium term, because we are the leading industry trainer, and to see that delivered on a week in basis that we do is phenomenal. But we need to do more, and we need to be more proactive rather than reactive. And then how do we put that into other parts of the organisation? So how do we sit and work with partners and stakeholders and develop relationships that we've perhaps not utilised before, whether that be with other trade associations, whether that be with publications like yourself, whether it be with LCRIG, or the whole raft of companies, organisations that sit within our sector. How does the RSMA punch above its weight? Bearing in mind it is a relatively small team, but how do we invest in ourselves and how do we punch us above our weight to represent all of those multifaceted, multi-leveled businesses that are both small and large?
Yeah. A lot to pick up on there. I'm really interested in the idea, so your priority was training. It'd be great to hear about some of the changes you put in place. And if I heard you right, you were suggesting you wanted the training to be more proactive rather than reactive.
Still do, to be fair.
That's a really interesting point. Can you elaborate? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, because I think when I arrived at the RSMA, we had one trainer, and if at any time you have challenges in terms of delivery, you've got all your eggs in one basket. So actually strengthening that training team, building more capacity into that training team was one of the key first things we did. And we're still doing that, I think it's fair to say. We have a great facility in Gainsborough, but we probably don't utilise it as much as we could do. But in order to do that, you've got to have capacity within the team to be able to deliver training. Otherwise, you burn people out within 5 minutes, and that's no good either. So it's how you build that training side, and then how you deliver that training in a proactive way. So when a member rings us and says, we've got 3 people to go on a SAP, or we've got a specialised applied skills program. When can they go on? We need to be able to say, right, we can do that now. We can do that imminently. We can do it quickly, and we can then be more proactive in how we reach out to our members to say, because actually that then breeds confidence, and confidence then supports that training piece, and also builds confidence in the RSMA for the whole of our membership to be able to come to us and say, actually, can you do this, this, and this? Yes, we can, because we've got the capacity to do it.
So I'm right in thinking you don't have kind of full-time trainers on staff.
We have 2 now.
2. Oh,
yeah.
Okay, brilliant. And where do they come from? What's the kind of profile?
That's a really good question. So Jason's background, who leads our training team, is ex-local authority, comes from a sector background, if you like. So his knowledge is great.
Yeah.
And his training's great. And actually,
it's also probably good to have that local authority insight as well.
100%. 100%. And he's been with the RSMA for a long time now.
Right.
I think, the best part of 12 years. And I think that's another feature of the RSMA, just going off a slight tangent. There are a number of long-standing employees, and that's fantastic. I have a number of colleagues that have been at the organisation a long time, and whilst I didn't know that when I arrived, you quickly understand that they know the history of the RSMA, and that's important for me as a chief exec coming in to say, okay, what's worked or hasn't worked before? What did we used to do, over the last 50 years that we've stopped doing for whatever reason, okay, and things like that. And then our second trainer actually came out of the military.
Okay.
And that was a real conversation, I think, that I had with my board at the time, and around, because it's really difficult to recruit out of the sector. You have individuals who are great line markers, but are they great trainers?
It's a completely different discipline.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
Just because you do something well doesn't mean you can teach it, because teaching is a skill in itself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And actually, so can you take somebody who has a training background,
right?
And Kieran, who we recruited, who was coming out of the services, was coming out of the RAF, is how do we take the skills that he has developed within the armed forces and then say, okay, can we teach about road markings to a level where you can then confidently bring that as a trainer? And that's a real, it's been a learning curve, I think, over the last 18 months that Kieran's been with us. But that has worked really, really successfully. And the engagement, because you have somebody who can really teach and train really well, is then passed on to those new entrants coming into the industry.
That's really good, yeah.
And that then creates a different dynamic and a whole different process.
Yeah.
And having somebody with a military background was a learning curve as well.
How so?
I think somebody coming out of the forces for the first time into the private sector, there is a challenge that employers need to be aware of. How do they adjust? How do they move from something that is very, very regimented between, coming in, starting at one time, finishing at another, the whole hierarchy process, which, the RSMA doesn't have at all. One of the early conversations I had with Kieran, and one thing that he said to me that he was difficult to adjust to was, what did he wear? What did he come to,
Right.
Because he was so used to getting up and putting a uniform on. And I do think, whilst ours is only a very small thing, if we're looking at a recruitment problem, which, challenges which there are across the whole sector, is how do we open the doors and actually make it comfortable for people to transition from one industry or one sector to another.
Yeah. It's such an interesting point, isn't it? I wanted to pick your brains on this, because I know this is been quite a big issue for you that you've taken on. You made it a key part of conference. You've really set your stall out, I think, very honourably and impressively to try to tackle the skills crisis, to boost the diversity of the people coming in. But before we got on that, I've just got one last question on the training. You spoke about being more proactive. Is that in how you deliver the training? Is that in just how you deliver the training, as you outlined there? Or is it in the type of things you're training as well? Did you change? Are you looking at new subjects or anything like that?
I think it's both. So being proactive is about having the right technology to deliver training in 2026 and beyond. So moving away from flip charts and pens to screens and how we engage with that.
Do you still? Is it all in person? Or
It's all in person.
Yeah, it's all in person. Yeah. You learn better that way.
I think so too. Yeah. I think so too. And then the other bit, and picking up the second part of your question, which was, just refresh me, Dom.
Are the subjects? Are you kind of being proactive in terms of the subjects you're training people in?
Yes, it's a short answer. So we are constantly looking to evolve and develop our training to reflect the changes that industry is seeing. So, we are seeing more cold applied products, than hot applied products.
Right.
We still predominantly as an industry do more hot applied products, yes, but we cannot ignore the fact that there is now an increase in cold applied products. With that comes certain challenges. So therefore we are adapting our training and working with members and partners to say, okay, have we got this training right? So you get that engagement piece, because actually then when you go to your members and say, we want to update our training, we want to make sure that it's fit for what you need it to be, you predominantly may do cold applied products. Okay, so how do we deliver cold applied training to support? And it's not about saying one is better than the other. It's about ensuring that those individuals, those people that go through our training, are equipped to do both.
Yeah. What's the source material, by the way, for the training? Where does the syllabus come from?
So it's worked through. So it's developed through the sector schemes, through our work closely with CITB, and all of our. So we effectively write our training courses in house, but they're then sort of verified and ratified, if you like, through the work that the CITB and others do with us in order to ensure that we are delivering what we need to deliver to ensure that those young people, well, of all ages, to be fair, not just young people, that's a bit unfair, that come into the industry have the right set of skills right at the very start.
And this is a qualification that people get, obviously, the road marking industry, this is a key qualification to get you in working
100%
with
MVQ
the
level
members.
2. And I think, we also, I think, as we look forward, certainly after, the challenges that came post-Grenfell in terms of ensuring that there is that route to competency. And, we, like every other sector, and part of our sector is looking at, have we got our route to competency correct? Have we got that sort of, also that refresher piece that comes in? How do we ensure that somebody is permanently updating their skills and knowledge, and how do we do that in a way that supports industry? So I think that's, that is critical to the whole sector going forward. And we must learn from that.
Do you want to refresh us? Because I remember Alistair Reisner gave an excellent presentation on this post-Grenfell route to competency program, and he was very, very complimentary of the work.
It was very kind of him, I have to say. And I think ensuring that we get that pathway correct, and ultimately it feeds into the whole retention piece, because if people are trained, supported, and feel confident in what they do, they will retain within the industry. And I think, we have to accept that not everybody wants to be in charge. Not everybody wants to run a crew. Not everybody wants to progress. But actually, they still want to feel valued in the work that they do. And so even if you get to a level where you say, well, actually, I don't want to be in charge of 3 or 4 people. I don't want to be a charge hand. I don't want to be a senior operator. I just want to do what I do. I'm quite happy doing that. We need to ensure that they are trained, supported, that they have a route through to competency, and then that we check it to ensure that they continue that level of awareness and training and that it's up to date. Yeah. And I think Alistair was very kind, and we have done a lot of work along with others. I think we're not the only trade association that needs to do this. I know we've worked in partnership with colleagues at the RSTA, for example, because it's we all need to do it, so we all need to deliver it in a uniform way, and that's important.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to backtrack, you'll have to correct me if I get, or excuse my ignorance, but essentially in the wake of the Grenfell Tower tragedy, there was a report that came out that looked at the responsibilities people had in relation to that building. Alistair put up a graphic which was, kind of grotesque in how
100%.
Everyone was pointing at, oh, well, they were responsible for that, and they were responsible for that. And essentially, this led, I think I'm right in saying, multiple points of failure. And as a result of this, the construction industry as a body, reluctant at first.
Very.
Yeah, but they seem to take this on now, and they've taken on this idea that we need a clear through line of, do you know what you're doing? Are you competent to do it? Can you demonstrate 100%. That publicly? And you were one of the key trade bodies that said, we will take this on in highways and we'll make sure that we...
100%.
Is that fair?
And that's absolutely fair.
Right.
And I think, that Alistair had a slide, if you like, that effectively showed the web. And it literally was, nobody wanted to take responsibility. It was always somebody else's fault. And it led to a number of people losing their lives, and the impact on those survivors will be huge, and those families and those extended families, and we, something had to happen. Yeah. And it's important as a sector that we do. Yeah.
As a chief exec, this is quite an interesting, I think, idea of how do you approach a situation where there is blame, but you don't want to have a blame culture, and how do you approach that? Would you call it accountability, transparency?
All of those things. I think it's accountability, it's transparency, and it's about having a process is too simple a word for it, but it's about having almost a cradle to grave approach of saying, well, actually, when somebody comes into the industry, where do they start? What do they do on day 1? Yeah. What do they do on day 3? What do they do on day 5? And then how do we back that up with training and competency that follows it through? But then equally, how do we then ensure that training and knowledge is refreshed on a regular basis within the sector schemes that says, are those people who started 5, 10, 15 years ago still as competent? Yeah. And they probably are. I think that's fair to say. But have they got into any bad habits? Yeah. Can we just ensure that we're back to, ensuring that they are competent and well-rounded and just really, really good at what they do. Yeah. And the majority, I have to say, in fact, within our sector, I think, training and competency has been very good. It's not like we're shutting the door after the horse has bolted, but that doesn't mean that you can't make improvements. No, of course. And I think that's the important thing. You recognise that you need to make improvements all of the time. Yeah. And if you keep doing that, you get better and better and better.
I mentioned earlier you are really interested in boosting participation in the sector, tackling the skills crisis and boosting diversity. You mentioned earlier some of the little things that can make a difference, and it's funny how sometimes you're just not aware of what potentially are barriers to other people. I know you've been promoting at conferences speeches to kind of encourage people to recognise the lack of diversity in our sector and the fact that this is a potential route to solving our skills crisis. Have you looked at what people think are the barriers to entering our sector, particularly women, people of colour?
That's a really good question, because clearly diversity within our sector is not as good as it could be. You only have to listen to the stats from the Sustainability School, from the surveys that they do on an annual basis, and diversity is not as well represented in our sector, whether that be female diversity or whether it be ethnic diversity. And I think historically there has been, and even now I think to a certain degree, there's a barrier of that's a guy's job, that's a man's job.
Why do you think people still see it like that?
I think we're working on main roads many of the time. Sometimes it's inflexible hours. Sometimes we work through the night on our main strategic highway, on our main road network. Traditionally, that has been a male industry, and it was really interesting. So in past conferences, we've looked at, and we've had people from, speakers from National Highways, CITB, talking about the glossary of, well, you should do flexible working, and you should do this, and you should do that. And this year we took that one step further, in the sense that we had Michael Littleboy from LNR Road Markings up in Cheshire, up in just south of in the Wirral in the Liverpool area, and he has what I'm aware of one of the first female crews.
All female
crews.
Cool. Oh, that's cool.
Very. And he came and spoke about that. And he spoke about the initial challenges, not having the correct PPE. Not having PPE.
Because it doesn't fit.
Because it doesn't fit. It's not shaped. It's not shaped. Not having, even down to simple things like, we still do work by hand. So if you've got a jug that is particularly heavy, or a bucket that takes X number of kilo, is it too much of an ask to say, get a smaller bucket or get a smaller jug? And that's what they've done at LNR, and that's why they've suddenly been successful in having an all-female crew. And equally, can you have facilities back at base for, that is not just a guys only toilet, for example. Do you need to sit down and talk to your workforce and talk to your people within your organisation and say, what do we need to do to enable an all-female crew? And he spoke really well about some of the initial challenges and some of the different ways of thinking that they had to do in order to have an all-female crew.
Yeah, that was your recent conference where you were speaking at. Yes, that was highlighted in our March issue of Highways, so right up of the RSMA conference. Sounds like a brilliant event. Sadly, I wasn't able to make it this year, but our deputy editor, George Barker, stood in for me. I had a great time. So, quick question. Which came first, though? The female-friendly equipment or the staff? Like, did he need to put the equipment in place to encourage women in, or did he encourage women in and say, don't worry, I'll get you the equipment, only after finding out that the current equipment wasn't?
I think it was a mixture of both.
Okay.
So I think, in terms of, there was I don't want to put words into Michael's mouth, but there was certainly a lead up to saying, well, actually, we want an all-female crew, and how can we do that? And I know that he went out to his local recruitment consultants in the area who they've used a lot, and said, this is what we want to do, that we want to challenge perceptions, and he worked with them, and it was a collaborative piece. But right. I know when those first female operatives came in, they sat down and they spent some time going through and saying, what do you need? And equally, they sat down with their all-male crews and said, not necessarily are you comfortable with this, but what challenges do you see?
That's interesting.
So they looked at it both ways, and actually had some really, I would say, probably what were considered at the time probably quite difficult conversations to have but in a space that created an open forum so that you can have those conversations. So in other words, if I've got an all-male crew, for example, and I know this because this is one of the conversations he had with me, he had a conversation with his, go home to your wives and partners and say, what do you think of me working with a female colleague on the roads at 2:00 in the morning? And how do you overcome those? And that's a really difficult conversation to have, but actually it then creates a space where everybody is comfortable and working together collaboratively. So we do need to think outside the box in terms of recruitment. And I touched on earlier about recruiting from the armed forces. Sadly, there are a lot of people leaving the armed forces at a time probably when we need them more. But there are a lot of people leaving the armed forces. But how do we make it easier for them to adjust?
Yeah.
How do we make it easier for them to come into our sector and into our industry? And we do need to be more proactive about that.
Yeah. I think some people listening to this may think, what is wrong with these people? Men and women have been working together for a while. But I think it's important to stress we've been so far behind and we're such a male-dominated industry.
Absolutely.
That even though it may seem odd to have these conversations in 2026,
100%.
These are kind of the conversations we need to have, would you say?
Yeah. Absolutely they are. And, it is, I am sure, in 2, 3, 5 years' time, the team at L&R won't have to have those conversations.
Yeah.
And they'll be leading the way here. But there will be other smaller organisations that perhaps haven't quite moved with those times that will need the support of the RSMA to be able to say, this is how you solve your recruitment process. This is how you start to do it. And we've learnt from the pioneering work that L&R have done to say, actually, we can then spread that word across the whole of our sector.
Okay, so is this something that you feel we should have guidance on, or is it too localised, specific, collaborative an issue for there to be something as perhaps, dare I say, generic as national guidance?
I don't think we need national. I think we need organisations like ourselves to, if you like, showcase, which I hope we did with Michael speaking, to showcase what can be done.
Right.
And then answer those questions open and honestly, as he did when somebody stuck up their hand and said, well, how did you do that?
Yeah.
I can't imagine doing that here or in my organisation, and actually then challenge it back and say, well, actually, you need to sit down and do this and have these conversations.
Yeah.
And actually, you need to think a little bit more. Now, we need to be the conduit, the cog, if you like, that enables that to spread wider across the sector.
So case studies, not guidance.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we were on a site visit, actually. It was interesting. Our super producer, Laura, was with me interviewing someone, and they said that their daughters were sort of involved in the industry. But the guy said, if I had had sons, I'd have told them to go out on the roads. And Laura, quite importantly, I think, picked up and said, well, why wouldn't you tell your daughters to go out on the roads? You know what he said? Honest, good faith, and he's a lovely guy. He said, "Oh, because there aren't any toilets for women," and that was the one thing that he said. And he wasn't saying that in terms of, "Oh, this is why I wouldn't let my daughter." He was saying, "This is why women sometimes struggle with the road environment." In 100%. His experience, it's just the toilet facilities.
100%, and I'm here nodding as you say that.
Yeah.
But that wouldn't be the first time that I have heard that.
Right.
So I have heard that a lot.
The privilege of peeing standing up just keeps on rewarding us.
And we're 2026, And, if you are saying that in 2026 we cannot organise welfare facilities well enough on our highways to enable females to come and work on our highways in our sector, boy, are we doing something wrong, and boy, do we need to catch up.
100%. So we addressed the idea that you were saying perhaps it's not suitable for national guidance in the round, but excellent case studies can be really useful to the sector. But you say that this issue of welfare facilities comes up. Is it right you're considering potentially national guidance on the welfare facilities, because that is such a specific but very key issue?
Yeah, I would absolutely. I think as an association, tackling welfare head on is really, really important. It's a conversation that I've had at board level that says, can we create some form of guidance around welfare and what good looks like? But I do think, we cannot do this in isolation. And I think when we have this is anecdotally, but I've heard it more than once, when we have barriers put up in terms of welfare facilities being paid for, being costed, being included within tenders, within contracts, I think, there's a slightly bigger problem than us just saying we can produce some guidance, because actually it's wider than that. We have to ensure, if we are going to make this industry and the whole of the highway sector open to everybody, we have to ensure that those welfare facilities are there for everybody. And actually, if that then costs a little bit more, then that's a cost we have to bear.
So is it true then that on quite significant contracts, there's still a problem getting people to pay for welfare facilities, the client?
Anecdotally, I would absolutely say that's true.
Yeah.
And I get, bottom lines are important, but people are important. And if we don't have those people within our sector and within our industry, then, we're shooting ourselves in the foot somewhat.
Yeah, 100%. So these are public sector bodies as well. They're the client, and they're saying they're not going to pay for welfare facilities. I mean, that's not on, is it?
It's not. And I think, we need to wake up. We absolutely need to. If we're going to tackle the crisis head on of recruitment into our industry, we absolutely need to wake up.
Yeah. And I would also say, was that like no welfare facilities for anyone? So they're just literally
limited. I think it's limited.
Okay.
But, I think, it is, whether you are male or female, it is inappropriate at 2:00 in the morning to be trying to find somewhere in order to go to the loo.
Yeah.
Whether that's I need to go and find a McDonald's, or whether I need to find a hedge, it's not right. It's really not.
100%. So how would you respond to those people who are basically blockers, who say, well, hang on, why would I bother? It's just extra money. My team does a good job at the moment. We've always done it this way. Why do we need to change? What's your argument to them?
I would politely say we're in 2026. We'd absolutely, if we value those people that work in our sector and work in our industry as much as we say that we do, and we want to retain them, we need to absolutely ensure that all facilities and ensure that everybody can come to work and not feel isolated or challenged in any way, shape or form.
Yeah. Skills, getting people into the sector and retaining people demands that we are
100%.
welcoming to all people and everyone. Because if you can't go to the toilet on the job, you can't really do the job. You can't work the job, can you? And that's just not fair.
It's not fair. Yeah. It's not fair. It's not right. You wouldn't expect it within an office environment. So why do we accept it on the roads?
Yeah. Yeah, imagine turning up to an office and they're like, no toilets.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Yeah, absolutely. It just wouldn't happen, would it? So why do we accept it on our roads?
Okay. All right, moving on. We very important issue. I feel like 100%. We may have talked about toilets
a little too much.
Enough.
Yes.
Shall we say enough? All right, brilliant. So, give me your highlights of your time for the last 3 years. I've got a few in my mind, but I want to hear yours.
I think, some of the highlights I think are the people within the industry, how collaboratively they work together, even though, and somebody, I've heard stories of, my truck's broken down, my line marking truck has broken down, I need to get a job done, and within hours a truck from from what would be perceived as a competitor has arrived so that job can be done and completed. So that whole collaboration and that collaborative approach is absolutely runs through our organisation and the sector like no other. And I think that was an eye-opener, but a positive one, and one that we should champion, because that happens a lot.
Yeah.
Crews from one company going to another company because they're really busy and they need some help and support. That whole collaborative piece works really, really well. And I think that has been, as I say, a real eye-opener, but in a very positive way. I think
you're not used to that in the finance industry.
I think it's less so, if I'm brutally honest.
I don't know what the finance equivalent would be, but you just get the government to bail you out.
Yeah. Perhaps not go there. But and I think that is really one that the industry should be proud of. I think that's first and foremost. What else am I pleased with, or what has been a highlight over the last 3 years? I think the work that we did in getting our temporary traffic management guidance out.
I was going to mention that. That's fantastic, isn't it?
It is fantastic. And again, that is industry coming together, working together across sectors to ensure that welfare and also road user, putting them at the heart so that they understand what's happening and doing things in a professional way, in a safe way, ensuring that everybody gets home safe and well, and that road users are fully informed on their journey, is a great piece of work that we have done over the last 12, 18 months.
Do you want to just kind of go into a little bit of background or detail about that? Because I think that is a really important release that came out.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we worked with one of our members down in the southwest, Greg Clark at QMS. So we initially worked with Chevron, Keith Smith, and Paul Aldridge, and collectively with the RSMA worked together to produce temporary traffic guidance, temporary road marking traffic guidance. And that was really to look at those small works that happen out in countries where traditionally people have just rocked up, probably put up a stop and go board and then got out as quickly as possible, but not necessarily in a safe way. And what we wanted to do was to create some guidance that allowed effectively temporary traffic management to be put in for those smaller works at junctions, out in rural locations, that kept drivers safe or workforce safe and drivers informed. So we worked with Keith and Paul to deliver that. Greg very kindly road trialled it for us down in the southwest. They had a lot of junctions to do. And we wanted really to put it through his paces, and Greg very kindly did that for us, and then spoke about it at our conference, to be fair, around what they'd learned. And I think one of the misnomers was this is going to ensure, a small work is going to become a big work. Well, I think he put that myth to bed straight away by effectively saying, well, actually, it literally adds 15 minutes to set up, take down, and actually do the work. So really, the argument of it'll mean a small work suddenly becomes a big work is gone. Yeah. The other thing I think that it presented was, because road users suddenly became aware of what was happening, abuse that does still happen on our roads, and I know this is something that you've looked at as a magazine in collaboration with others, road worker abuse sadly is on the rise, but actually we're putting information out there that allowed the road user to understand what was happening actually cut down on that abuse. So there was an information grab, if you like, that said, and a raising of what was happening that enabled the driver to say, well, actually, I can see what's happening. Right, okay, I take avoiding accident, etc., and therefore you don't get the abuse.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I wanted to pick up on. Do you think kind of in the future, we could do it now, but for kind of industry level guidance on preventing road worker abuse, which I understand National Highways are working on we speak.
Yep.
And I think the Highway Sector Council may well be looking into that. Don't quote me on that, but that was an action point for them. But the guidance could potentially stress that you have to have or try your best through the client, through the contractor, through whoever, to have a connection to sat-nav companies, so you remove the point of conflict in the first place. Because as you say, this, whenever you get out on the road, you're running the risk of the live road environment, of course, but you're also then unforgivably suffering abuse from members of the public. Which, of course, there's no excuse for that. It's completely unacceptable. There is a point of conflict that could potentially be removed by linking better with information services, sat-nav services. Is that fair? And how do you see the RSMA's role in promoting that?
It's absolutely fair. And I think, technology is, expanding and exponentially. It is, what happens now, and the systems and processes that are available in car. We had the HAS alert system showcased at this year's annual conference, and work that they're doing with WJ, which effectively flips it up on the Waze app, soon to be integrated with others. That there is a mobile works or roadworks ahead, and to flag that warning. I think
that's as soon as the crew gets there. There's basically kind of push button.
Absolutely.
We're working here, and it goes out.
And
they're rolling that out.
And they're rolling that out.
Right.
And I think we have to embrace technology. Everybody has to embrace technology, and if that leads to less abuse, better informed road users of all types, and more understanding of what's happening because I'm better informed, then that has to be a good thing. And if it ensures that everybody gets home safe and well as well as all of those things, then it becomes a much, the benefit of in-car systems and that whole alert system, it is absolutely should be embraced.
Yeah. I want to talk though a little bit. There's a role there for National Highways, bringing that together, potentially drawing up they will be drawing up the guidance, and potentially that guidance will help bring people together. Your membership, you've got some big guns there.
Yep.
But you've got a lot of quite small outfits, local outfits. How easy is it for them to change when there is some kind of national guidance, when we're talking about those kind of connections? Because you would think, for the big companies, they can have that kind of conversation with the likes of Waze and SatNav and so on and so forth. What's the situation for the smaller outfits when we're talking about moving ahead in these kind of big digital areas?
I think it is a challenge. I mean, there is no doubt that it's an investment in kit, if you like, and that is a challenge for those smaller members, I think, who don't have the resources that those bigger organisations do. However, over time, as this becomes more of the norm rather than the exception, that cost will come down. The economies of scale say that this cost will come down.
Yeah.
That will make it more affordable for those smaller members to do. Equally, I think there will be a degree of collaboration here within the sector, which it is good at, Yeah. So I can see that happening. I mean, whether we see any more consolidation in the sector, I think, is probably open for debate. We may well see that at some point in the future. But I do think there will be opportunities looking forward, perhaps not in the short term, but certainly in the medium term, where the cost of technology comes to a point whereby it is affordable for those smaller members. But it is certainly a challenge in the first instance.
Yeah. Is there some role for government, National Highways, well, maybe not National Highways, but government to play, to say for statutory undertakers or anyone on the roads, there is some support to allow this once you've established it as kind of best practice.
I think that would be great, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I think, how they did that, how they rolled it out, how they integrated it into their road safety strategy that's just been published, and how all of those parts connect,
Yeah.
I think will be interesting to see going forward. Funding is always a challenge.
Yeah.
But let's see.
Let's see. Any other highlights?
I think we've touched on the guidance that we've done. I think the other highlight, which we're starting to do more and more of now, is how we engage with others within the sector, how we raise the profile, and how we work collaboratively with partners. So we work much more closely now with the likes of the RSTA, with Mike and the team there, because we have a number of shared objectives. And how do we then punch above our weight, going back to that piece again. So there's a lot more collaboration now at my level, at organisation level, at trade association level, and I think that is, whilst it's still very much in its early days, it's certainly something that we can see more of going forward.
What's the ultimate outcome that you're hoping from those types of collaboration?
I think that we speak collectively to central and local government. Having one voice collectively is much better than having 4 or 5 individually.
Yeah.
And we will be able to shape and support government and local government more effectively if we do that collaboratively than if we do it individually. I mean, nobody wants to hear 5 different voices sat around the government's table shouting from one end to the other. That's no good. That won't won't raise the challenges that we have as a sector cohesively.
Yeah.
We need to work together to be able to do that.
Fair play. Talking about influencing government policy, your response to the road safety strategy, how do you view it? Was there enough in there for you to kind of have a response, or do you think it didn't quite get into that technical level?
Didn't quite get into that technical level.
Yeah.
Susie Sharman put it eloquently again at our last conference, where she talked about the ambition is there, but there is a lot of hard work in order to achieve that ambition, and it is really important that industry gets behind it to ensure that it happens. For me, it is wait and see. I sincerely hope that it works, that it's given time to work, and that the investment follows at his, what is potentially a very challenging time for everybody.
Yeah. That's Dr. Susie Charman, of course, from the Road Safety Foundation, one of the leading lights in road safety in this country, who also did something fun at your conference. She looks up on AI what the biggest interventions in road safety had been. They didn't mention road marking.
They didn't, and they should have done, for sure.
So thankfully AI isn't ready to take over yet, because it doesn't even know about road markings. But she said, and she really is an expert in this area, she said road markings, particularly those profiled road markings, anything that makes the road more legible is one of the best value for money interventions you can make in road safety.
Absolutely, 100%. And we, the results of this will be coming out shortly. So this is a bit of an exclusive, Dom, I have to say.
Okay, you're coming on to the survey.
I'm coming. So we've done two things. One is we've done a survey of over 2,000 road users around the importance of edge lines on roads and the impact that they have both on the rural and urban economy. And the results of that, I think, they are staggering. I've seen them. I know that there is huge support for edge lines and the importance that they play in road safety. So that is something that's coming out very shortly. So you have an early scoop of that, and we will share that. We will share that with you as and when it comes. And the other thing that we've done is our road condition survey. So we've looked at markings across England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Wales, across all 4 parts of the UK. and the results of that will follow the edgeline piece towards the end of the early second quarter of this year. And again, those early indications of those results, and I don't think this is a surprise to anybody, that perhaps our markings aren't as good as they could be.
Okay, you can't give us any juicy stats, headlines at this moment?
I think, the juicy stats on the edgeline piece is, nearly 80% of UK road drivers support the use of edgelines on our UK infrastructure roads, and have put off going to use facilities or businesses in their local area because they felt unsafe on the roads. And I think, if we're in a position where we want to build the economy and we want growth, we absolutely want people to go out and use our businesses in our communities and in our urban areas. And more importantly, and I think more shockingly, is the stats are even higher with younger drivers.
Oh, really?
So we have a situation where younger drivers don't feel confident and safe on the roads. And I would naturally, anecdotally have said, well, it'll be the older drivers that don't feel confident. It's not, it's younger drivers.
Yeah.
So in a aging demographic, in an aging workforce, in a time when we have rising unemployment, young people don't feel confident on our roads. So I think that's, first and foremost, that's key, and that'll come across. And in terms of the road marking condition survey that we've done, there'll be no surprises there in terms of, the levels that our roads are at. The lack of investment over time has really showcased in terms of markings aren't as good as we would like them to be. And I think the important thing there is to say, if we have a road safety strategy and we want to reduce deaths and seriously injured on our roads, we need good markings, and we need markings to be refreshed and a whole maintenance programme. And, we mustn't forget that road markings are one of the lowest cost safety interventions that you can do. And it's up for us as the RSMA to ensure that that case is put forward.
Okay, brilliant. Well, watch this space then. Lots coming out from the RSMA. Just a few quick fire questions to wrap up then. We've heard about the reports coming out, the surveys, but in general, the future of the sector, where do you see it going, and how do you see the RSMA playing a part in that?
I think it's very healthy. I think that's first and foremost. We've touched on some really difficult subjects for the sector in terms of recruitment and retention, but overall, I do think the industry is very healthy. And when I speak to my members, they tell me how healthy it is. They've never been busier. They've not had a great start to the year because the weather's not been that kind. But if they look back over last year and as they look forward, they're telling me that it's healthy, and that's encouraging.
Yeah. In terms of technology, any kind of general are you ripe for disruption?
Are we
How
right?
are you going to be disruptive?
I think, disruptive, but disruptive in a nice way, in a very collegiate way, I think it's fair to say.
Okay.
So, yes, we will be disruptive. Yes, we will support disruption, but we want to do it in a structured and informed way.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's safety after all.
Absolutely.
It's absolutely key.
We're dealing with people's lives, and that's, we can't be flippant about that.
Okay. I just say some quick fire questions. What's your approach to leadership? These are big questions, but they're also quick fire.
Oh,
so,
I listen to people. I absolutely listen to people. Right. My approach to leadership is listen to other people, because actually their voice is just as important.
What's your main ambitions for your time at the RSMA? When you get, I think you mentioned legacy earlier. What do you hope your legacy will be? That
I leave the RSMA in a much stronger place than when I arrived, and that's not that it wasn't in a strong place, but an even stronger place. That it's raised its awareness, that it's grown within the sector in terms of a voice, and that our members absolutely are engaged with the RSMA from large to small.
Yeah. What's something you say people need to know about you?
Oh, that I'm approachable. That
nice.
What do people need to know about me? That I will listen. That I absolutely will listen, and I do care. And when they say to me there's a problem, I will listen and I will do my utmost to get it sorted.
Yeah. Okay. Very quickly, another potential area of controversy: the long-running saga of the live road trial between RSMA and National Highways. This predates your time somewhat.
It does.
Without getting into anything that could be too controversial, the latest update, is there an update?
There is an update, actually, and
Go on.
you know, I think it is positive in the sense that, you know, I think it's fair to say that the RSMA was perhaps not the best organisation to facilitate and put on the road trial, and what I mean by that is we were able to bring people to the table. We weren't necessarily the best person to lead and manage that process. But I am,
because it's quite heavily. There's a big insurance issues. There's
all of that,
you know,
all
right,
of that,
yeah,
all of that. And I think, you know, the risk shouldn't have fallen on the RSMA's shoulders.
And you're very kind of members focused, small team, members focused, careful, hands on with your members, but this kind of huge legal insurance juggernaut of live trials is maybe a bit
was not for us.
Right,
I think that's
fair
fair
enough.
to say. And it needed to sit with National Highways, I think, in fairness.
Right.
And I'm pleased to say that they are now exploring and have gone quite a long way down the road. You know, Darren Hawes at National Highways and I have worked quite closely to put a case together so that National Highways can run their own trial site. And I know there's a lot of work. I've been in a lot of meetings over the last few months around putting the case together to go up to National Highways to say there's a real reason for this, and there's a real reason why National Highways should lead it, and we will support them 110% in doing that. So watch this space on that. I think it's fair to say.
Brilliant. So they're building. So internally, there's the program. Whether it gets final sign off, we don't know. But
there's certainly a lot of work behind the scenes being done in terms of identifying the right site, in terms of ensuring that the correct risk is undertaken and those health and safety aspects are undertaken, and that's being done currently, so that they can put the case to senior management within National Highways that says, here's the evidence, but here's how we're going to do it over the next 3 to 5 years, and what does that look like?
Yep.
They are very close to that step, I have to say. The original target for some form of decision was the end of March, so we're getting closer to that.
Okay, brilliant. Again, watch that space. I would just say very quickly, for my 2 pennies worth, you know, we are the nation that invented cat's eyes, and we may be missing out on the next cat's eyes if we don't get some form of trialling system
100%
up and running.
100%. I mean, you know, I think the development of road studs has been exceptional. You know, I've seen some presentations from the likes of Clearview, what they can now do with road studs that we couldn't have done 50 years ago when the RSMA started. You know, in terms of interactive, in terms of how they function and how they manage traffic, you know, I think is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, it's crazy. I was on a site visit with one company, you can probably imagine which one, but I'll leave them nameless. They're road testing one of their studs, I think it was, with this wheel-over machine. And the tyre in the wheel-over machine wore out before the road stud.
There you go.
So, yeah, I mean, that's... No, sorry, I take that back. It was the asphalt the road stud wore out before the road stud. So the road stud's actually engineered to last longer than the road it goes in. Yeah. But, yeah. All right, final question.
Yes.
Tell us something about yourself that not many people know.
Well, I've got 2, and you did give me pre-warning of this, Dom, which is very kind of you. First and foremost, I have a strong jazz history within the family. So my relation was Rob Shearing, the very accomplished jazz pianist who did a lot with Nat King Cole.
Wow.
So he is on my playlist, I hasten to add. So that's first and foremost. And my dad, who sadly passed away a few years ago now, is the spitting image of George, I think it's fair to say. And the second thing is we're in London here as we came across the city. in one of my previous roles, I had a house in the Tower of London or a flat in the Tower of London to use on a regular basis. It sounds very cool. It was very cool. And it is, it's one of those after dinner things.
It's definitely cool. Do you want to say? Because my reaction was, that's like the ultimate bachelor pad, but
it's not when you've got to be in before 10:30, because that's when they shut the gates, when they do the closing ceremony of the keys. So not quite so great.
Yeah. Did they do a closing ceremony every night? Like a full...
full
interesting.
Thing. Yeah, very.
You get locked out
You're
if
locked
you miss...
out.
Fully locked out.
Fully locked out.
Fully locked... And they don't compromise?
No.
Were you ever locked out?
No.
You were never locked out?
I was never locked out.
How long did you live there for?
A couple of years, on and off.
Wow, that's actually really impressive.
Very impressive, yeah.
So I hope you enjoyed that interview. I'm sure you'll agree Rob is one of the nicest people you would ever meet. He's got a real warmth, a real humanity. He really cares, and he's really making a difference. Coming up on the next Highways Magazine podcast, we have another feature-length interview with the wonderful Paula Clayton-Smith, who worked at Geist, of course, and Elkrig. And really, honestly, you do not want to miss this one. We go on quite a journey. There's a lot to discuss there, and I think it's a really important one that the sector. For the sector to listen to. Paula's an expert in her area, but she also talks a lot about herself and the things she's been through in her career. And I think it's a really moving and inspiring conversation. So I hope you can make it there for the next issue of the Highways Magazine podcast. Remember to click, like, subscribe, share, tell people about it. If you can get a t-shirt made and start wearing that around, that would be brilliant. It's the Highways Magazine podcast. Thank you very much for listening. Safe journeys, everyone.